My name is Dr. Mohammad Iqbal, and I am working as Assistant Professor of Surgery at Liver Transplant and HPV Unit, the University of Health Sciences, Karachi. And today, the topic of my presentation is the management of obstructive jaundice and the pancreatic tumor. So, uh, in my presentation today, I would like to cover the basic concepts of the management of obstructive jaundice. And since it is third year presentation, I will try to make it simple so that you people can understand the basic concepts of the jaundice, obstructive jaundice, and then you are able to make a plan how to investigate a patient with obstructive jaundice, and then you'll be able to manage the patient with obstructive jaundice. So the learning outcomes, learning objectives of my presentation is to describe the anatomical landmarks related to the obstructive jaundice. Definitions are very important in a patient with obstructive jaundice, the biliary metabolism, and how can you be able to differentiate between uh, different types of jaundice. For a third year student, this is very much important because in your
एक्सक्यूज
daily
मी सर,
life, जी जी,
सर
हेलो,
आपकी प्रेजेंटेशन नजर नहीं आ रही सर।
शेयर तो किया हुआ है मैंने
सर आपकी सिर्फ स्क्रीन शेयर है, प्रेजेंटेशन ऑन नहीं है।
यार। ये प्रेजेंटेशन देखिएगा। हेलो, मैंने प्रेजेंटेशन शेयर की भी है, नहीं आ रही शेयर,
नहीं सर,
शेयर नहीं हो रही प्रेजेंटेशन।
प्रेजेंटेशन चल नहीं रही है। आपकी जो यूएसबी है ना, तो वो यूएसबी खुल के सारी प्रेजेंटेशन की लाइन से आ रही है, मगर कौन सी स्टार्ट करेंगे वो ऑन हुई हुई। हाँ अब आई। जी सर अब आ गई, अब स्टार्ट।
Okay.
थैंक यू सो
So,
मच।
thank you. My name is Dr. Mohammad Iqbal, and I'm working as Assistant Professor of Surgery at Liver Transplant and Hepatopancreatobiliary Surgery Unit, Dow International Medical College, Dow University of Health Sciences, Karachi. And today, the topic of my presentation is the management of obstructive jaundice and the pancreatic tumor. And for a third year student, I have tried my best to make my presentation simple so that you people can understand what basically jaundice is, how can you be able to differentiate between different types of jaundice, and then you people should be able to understand the basic anatomical structures which are related to the patient with obstructive jaundice. What are the structures which are involved when a patient develops jaundice, and then what are the clinical presentation, what basic investigations are used, and then very brief basic concepts of the surgical procedures and therapeutic interventions which we do in a patient with jaundice. So the learning outcome of my presentation is, at the end of the presentation, students are able to describe the basic anatomical landmarks which are related to a patient with obstructive jaundice, definitions which are very important for a third year student, and different types of jaundice, the basic concepts of biliary metabolism. I think it is a revision of your first year and second year basic physiology and anatomy. And then you are able to differentiate between different types of jaundice. I think at the end of the presentation, students will be able to evaluate a patient with obstructive jaundice. This is what is the basic evaluation theme. They should be able to construct a basic management plan of a patient with obstructive jaundice, what investigations are required, and how can we interpret the investigations. And then at the end, one cause of the jaundice is carcinoma head of pancreas, pancreatic tumor. So you should be able to know the basic concepts of the management of a patient with pancreatic tumor. The basic anatomical landmarks is the biliary ductal system, the intrahepatic ducts, the extrahepatic ductal system, Callet's triangle, ampulla of Witten and sphincter of Oddi. So in my presentation, I will discuss these anatomical landmarks first. So in this picture, you people can able to differentiate, able to see clearly what is the biliary drainage system. Uh, So you can see this. This is the right ductal system and this is the left ductal system. And when these two ductal systems they combine together intrahepatically, and this is the extrahepatic part where the common hepatic duct arises. So this picture is very important for our consequent presentation. So the left hepatic duct which drains the left of the liver, and the right hepatic ducts which drain the right of the liver, and then they unite together to form the common hepatic duct. And this is the cystic duct, and this is the gallbladder which is attached. And then we have got common bile duct. This common bile duct is formed when the cystic duct joins the common hepatic duct, and then this common bile duct has got a extra pancreatic course, suprapancreatic course, then it goes behind the pancreas having a retropancreatic course, then it goes inside the pancreas, intrapancreatic course, where this common bile duct is joins the pancreatic duct, and when they both meet together, this is the ampulla, and where it opens into the duodenum. So the normal when the stomach food enters the stomach, actually the pylorus become closed. The food remains in the stomach for about 2 to 4 hours, and when the food enters the duodenum, actually we know that the cholecystokinin is the enzyme which is secreted, and this cholecystokinin cause dilatation of the ampulla, it cause contractions of the gallbladder, so that the whole of the bile along with the pancreatic juice mixed with the food in the duodenum, and which is necessary for the absorption. This is the intrahepatic biliary drainage system. We all know that the hepatocytes, the liver cells, they form the bile, and actually they take the heme biliverdin. The hemoglobin is converted into biliverdin in the spleen, and from here the unconjugated uh, bilirubin is entered into the hepatocytes. From there it is conjugated in the liver, and then it is secreted into the biliary canaliculi, and then the small ductules, major ductules, intersectoral ducts, and then the right hepatic and the left hepatic duct. From there they enter into the common bile duct, and since the ampulla of Witter is contracted in the normal resting state, in the normal fasting state, the whole of the biliary secretions are stored in the gallbladder. And when the patient, the food enters the duodenum, the cholecystokinin is released. This whole juice enters into the duodenum. So some important landmarks about the extrahepatic biliary drainage system. You can see this. This is the right and left common hepatic ducts, and then this is the common hepatic duct. When the cystic duct, this is the gallbladder, this is the neck of the gallbladder, this is cystic duct. So when the cystic duct joins the common hepatic duct, the CBD is formed. The common bile duct has got a supraduodenal course, then retroduodenal course, then this is the infraduodenal part of the common bile duct, and then intrapancreatic part where it joins the pancreatic duct, and then they both enters into the ampulla. So this is a very common presentation of the biliary flow. You can all see this. This is the right hepatic ductal system. This is the left hepatic ductal system. This is the left common hepatic duct. This is the right hepatic duct. They joins together to form the common hepatic duct. This is the gallbladder, and then when the cholecystokinin is released, bile from the gallbladder and from the both ducts, it goes into the common bile duct, and then it's the pancreatic juice comes through the pancreatic duct, and the flow is entered into the duodenum. This is a surgically important Callet's triangle. It is a triangle which is bounded by the cystic duct inferiorly, and on the medial side is the common hepatic duct, and superiorly is the gallbladder bed. This is the liver where cross is there, and the significance of this triangle is that it contains the cystic artery. So I think for the third year student, they should know what is the Callet's triangle. Now this is the very important diagram. This is a very important diagram for my presentation actually. This is the ampulla of Witt and sphincter of Oddi. This is the uh, some macroscopic description, people can see that this is the common bile duct, and this common bile duct is entering. This is the pancreas. This is the interpancreatic part of the common bile duct. This common bile duct is joined by the common pancreatic duct, and this is the sphincter. This is the sphincter of the common bile duct. This is the sphincter of the common pancreatic duct, and then this is the sphincter of the ampulla, when the duodenal ampulla. And in the normal resting state, normal fasting state, this sphincter is closed. And only when the food enters the duodenum, actually from the stomach, approximately 2 to 4 hours after the meal, it depends upon how fatty meal is. If it is a fatty meal, then the food will take more time to enter into the duodenum. And when the food is entering the duodenum, the cholecystokinin is released. And due to this, the sphincter is relaxed. And you can see this. This is the endoscopic view when we enter into the duodenum. Actually, you can see this is the ampulla, which is clearly seen, and this is the ampulla. So this picture is very important to understand the basic pathophysiology of obstructive jaundice. So now coming to the basic definitions, jaundice is a French word meaning yellow, and usually this term is used for the yellowish discoloration of the sclera, skin, or mucous membrane due to deposition of bilirubin. Normal bilirubin levels are around 0.2 to 1, and in some labs 0.2 to 1.5 milligrams per deciliter. Jaundice is clinically detected in sclera when serum bilirubin is greater than 2.5 to 3 milligrams per deciliter. So this is very important, because if it is less than this, it is subclinical jaundice. But if the bilirubin is more than 3, then we can see the sclera, which is yellowish in color. And when the jaundice exceeds of to more than 6 milligrams per deciliter, then the skin and the mucous membranes and the whole body become ecteric, and you can easily see a patient with a clinical jaundice. So, in understanding jaundice, I think this is the most important picture, because whenever a patient comes to you for a jaundice, and in your daily life, I think every student will meet a patient with jaundice in your family or in social gatherings. You can see a lot of people and with reports, and they came to you that their patient is having jaundice. So jaundice is classically divided into three basic types. One is pre-hepatic jaundice, when because the basic physiology of the bilirubin is the red blood cells, they breaks down into hemoglobin. When they breaks down, the hemoglobin is released. Usually the breakdown of the RBCs takes place in the spleen, and when the RBCs are breakdowns in the spleen, actually the hemoglobin is released, and this hemoglobin is converted into biliverdin, and then into the bilirubin. So this is the prehepatic phase. So any condition which leads to increased destruction of the red blood cells leads to hemolytic jaundice, because the load of the conjugation in the liver is increased, and the liver cannot meet the demand of the load of the hemoglobin or biliverdin which is coming. So that's why it leads to jaundice. Then the bilirubin, which is unconjugated, it enters into the liver, and the liver actually conjugate the bilirubin. So if there is any disease which leads to uh, hepatocellular dysfunction, just like viral hepatitis, drugs toxicity, or the chronic liver disease, cirrhosis, or any tumor, you can see this in this diagram. The liver function is disturbed, and the liver is not able to conjugate the bilirubin, or it is able to conjugate a small amount of bilirubin. Then this bilirubin enters the blood, and we can have unconjugated hyperbilirubinemia. This is known as hepatocellular jaundice. So in a patient with hepatocellular jaundice, you will have a increased total bilirubin level. You can have both conjugated and unconjugated hyperbilirubinemia, and the liver enzymes, which is the SGPT and SGOT, or AST or ALT, which we know as the liver enzymes, the hepatocellular enzymes. These enzymes are very much raised in a patient with uh, hepatocellular jaundice. So whenever a patient comes to you, you should be able to differentiate between what is it a hemolytic jaundice, is it the hepatocellular jaundice, and the third our topic is the obstructive jaundice, which is the post-hepatic jaundice. When the conjugated bilirubin is enters into the biliary tree, which we have discussed, the right and left hepatic ducts, the common hepatic ducts, the gallbladder, and if there is any obstruction in this biliary tree anywhere from the common hepatic duct up to the ampulla of Vater, you can see in this picture the carcinoma of the ampulla of Vater, the carcinoma of the head of the pancreas, the gallstones. So a lot of diseases can lead to the obstruction of the bile flow when it is secreted from the liver, and then it is the post-hepatic jaundice. So in this post-hepatic jaundice, the bilirubinemia is conjugated. The direct bilirubin levels are raised in the liver function test reports. The alkaline phosphatase and gamma GT, which are the intercanaliculaire enzymes which are secreted into the biliary canaliculi. So these two enzymes are very much raised. We can have raised SGPT and SGOT, the liver enzymes, but they are not very much raised in a patient with obstructive jaundice. So this concept need to be cleared at this time. So I try to make it more clear. You can see this is the red blood cells, and these red blood cells breaks down in the spleen where the heme is released, and this heme is converted into the biliverdin. This biliverdin is then from the spleen it goes to the liver actually. So if there is the increased destruction of the red blood cells and increased production of the heme, we call it hemolytic jaundice. And then the bilirubin is conjugated in the liver. So when in hepatocellular jaundice, any disease due to any disease, if the liver is unable to conjugate the bilirubin, we have got hepatocellular jaundice. And then from there, you people can see this. The bilirubin is secreted, conjugated bilirubin is secreted into the bile ducts and the small intestine. So if there is any obstruction in the pathway of the bile, then we call it obstructive jaundice when it is biliary channels are unable to excrete the conjugated bilirubin into the small intestine. So we call it obstructive jaundice. So this is the more clear picture. If people can see this, increased hemolysis leads to unconjugated hyperbilirubinemia because there is more destruction of the RBCs in the blood and the spleen. And this unconjugated bilirubin is enters into the liver where it is conjugated to glucouronic acid and it becomes conjugated. So this conjugated bilirubin is then secreted in the biliary system. So any obstruction which leads to the conjugated or direct hyperbilirubinemia. So the bile is not able to reach the feces. Normally 90% of the bile from the gut is secreted through the feces. So we have got dark brown feces. And urine is not very much dark because only 10% of the urobilinogen is enters the portal vein and it is secreted through the kidneys. So in a patient with obstructive jaundice, when the bile is not able to enter the feces, is not able to enter the small intestine, the bile is not able to mix with the feces become pale in color. We have got very pale feces, and the whole of the urobilinogen is then enters the conjugated bilirubin is secreted to the kidneys. So the urobilinogen is excreted in the urine, majority of the urobilinogen. So we have got very dark urine in a patient with obstructive jaundice and very pale stools. So this is also another picture. When we have got a prehepatic or hemolytic jaundice, the bilirubin which is raised is unconjugated or indirect bilirubin. In a hepatic or hepatocellular jaundice, the bilirubin which is raised is mixed with both unconjugated and conjugated hyperbilirubinemia. These are some common causes of viral hepatitis, which is very common in our population. And in a post-hepatic or obstructive jaundice, you people can see this. There is a conjugated bilirubinemia in any obstruction, just like tumor of the bile ducts and gallstones, which are the most common causes. So what is obstructive jaundice is? I think people can understand this. Obstructive jaundice, as the name suggests, or jaundice due to obstruction. Jaundice due to obstruction. So jaundice due to partial or complete obstruction to the flow of bile into the gut is that obstructive jaundice. It is a very simple definition. So this diagram is very important. It enlists the basic causes of the obstructive jaundice. So in general terms, we can classify it extraluminal causes, intramural causes, and the interluminal causes. So here, first of all, I will discuss the extraluminal causes when there is a compression of the biliary channels from the outside. Just like the liver malignancies, they can compress the intrahepatic biliary channels, and then they may present with jaundice, just like the patient with liver metastasis, mostly to the breast, see colon. So the metastatic liver disease can present with an obstructive jaundice. Then we can have got metastatic lymph nodes, just like due to the gallbladder cancer or carcinoma stomach. So these lymph nodes can compress the biliary channels from outside, and we can have obstructive jaundice. And then pancreatitis, when there is a pancreatitis, the pancreas become very hard, so it can compress the distal part of the common bile ducts. The tumor of the pancreas, they can also compress the bile ducts from the outsides. And the ampullary carcinoma at the ampulla, they can also compress the opening of the uh, pancreatic ducts and the biliary ducts in the duodenum, and then it leads to jaundice. So this is the extraluminal causes of the jaundice. Then we've got intramural causes, something within the walls of the biliary channels, just like atrasias, cholangitis, strictures, and the tumors. So when there is an abnormality within the walls of the mucosa, submucosa, and muscularis layers of the biliary channels, and the obstruction, we call it intramural causes of obstructive jaundice. And when there is intraluminal causes, something within the lumen, just like you can see this, any foreign body, worms, parasites, they can enter the biliary channels, and then we have got stones which can cause the jaundice. One more classification is you can classify according to the type of the disease, whether it is a benign disease or it is a malignant disease. So we can have got benign disease, just like CBD stones, Meniere's syndrome, stricture, and parasites. It can lead to jaundice. And in malignant cases, we know that the CBD tumor, the carcinoma of pancreas, ampullary carcinoma, and the lymph nodes, they can also lead to jaundice. So this is a diagrammatic presentation. You can see this, the stones from the gallbladder, the stones can come, they enter the cystic duct, and then they enter the common bile duct, and they can obstruct the bile duct at various levels. They can be primary stones within the liver, which is primary hepatic stones. They can also, when there is a biliary stasis or infection, the primary stones can be formed within the gall biliary system, and then they can cause jaundice. So hepatolithiasis, cholelithiasis, and cholelithiasis. This is very important for the third year student should know what Meniere's syndrome is, because when a stone, which is a very big stone, and it enters the cystic duct, it is obstructed at the cystic duct lumen, but it cannot enter the common bile duct because it is big in size, and then it remains there and further increase in size, and then it causes the compression of the common hepatic duct. You can see clearly this is the right hepatic duct, this is the left hepatic duct, which is distended, and this stone which is obstructed at the cystic duct is compressing the common bile duct and the common hepatic ducts, and it causes inflammation, it causes a thickening of the walls of the common bile duct, and it can cause obstructive jaundice. This is known as Meniere's syndrome. So people should understand this terminology. And here you can see this. This is a tumor of the common bile duct. This is the pancreatic duct which is spared. The ampulla is spared, but this is a distal CBD tumor, and this tumor compresses the common bile duct and blocks the flow of bile to intestine. So the bile accumulates and leads to jaundice. So this is a Klatskin tumor, which is a very important tumor, and you should know what Klatskin is. This is the right hepatic duct, this is the left hepatic duct, and any tumor at the confluence of the right and left hepatic ducts and at the common hepatic duct, this is the, you can see the junction. If a tumor is there, this is new tumor is known as Klatskin's tumor, and then people can see this tumor has the intramural cause. It increase the thickness of the biliary channel wall, the bile wall is, and the stricture formation, malignant stricture formation, and it leads to jaundice. You can see this in picture. The tumor have the pancreas. It is the extraluminal cause because it is not originated in the biliary channel, but it obstruct the bile duct, common bile duct from outside. So it can. This is the head of the pancreas. This is the loop of the duodenum. You people can see this. This tumor can obstruct the common bile duct and the pancreatic duct, and it leads to the jaundice. So these are the common causes of jaundice. So now come to the clinical presentation. These are very important clinical presentation in a patient with obstructive jaundice. People can easily differentiate a patient with obstructive jaundice from other forms of jaundice, because in jaundice, as we have discussed, the bile is not able to reach the small intestine. So the whole of the urobilinogen is now secreted into the through kidneys, and it is conjugated, it is mixed in the blood, it can easily secreted in the urine. So we have got very dark urine and pale stools. So this is very important. And since the bile salts and bile acids is also secreted into the blood, they deposit in the skin and they can create a lot of rash. So itching is very important. The jaundice in any patient with dark urine and pale stools and itching is more in favor of, or you can say, pathognomic of obstructive jaundice. Then we can have got abdominal pain. If it's stone disease, we can have got pain. If it's a tumor and which is enlarged in size due to the cholestasis, the liver capsule is distended and we can have got abdominal pain as well. Two signs are very important in a patient with obstructive jaundice. One is Kohr-Weiser signs and other is Charcot striate. So when the gallbladder is palpable in a patient with jaundice, we can say Kohr-Weiser's law is that it is not due to the stone disease, because if the patient is having gallstones and these gallstones are the cause of jaundice, first of all, these gallstones cause multiple attacks of acute cholecystitis and chronic cholecystitis in the gallbladder. So the Kohr-Weiser says that the gallbladder is already contracted and it is thick-walled, contracted gallbladder, and then this stone cause jaundice. So if a patient with jaundice comes to you and the gallbladder is distended, it means that the gallstone is not the primary pathology, and likely it is a tumor of the CBD or the pancreatic head which is causing distension of the gallbladder. So this is the Kohr-Weiser's law or Kohr-Weiser's sign. And in a patient with jaundice, if he develops cholangitis because the biliary system is obstructed and the patient becomes jaundice, so if the patient develops cholangitis, they triad of fever, pain, and jaundice, right hypochondric pain, fever, and jaundice, we call this Charcot triad. So this is again, you can see the jaundice with pale bulky stools and dark urine. This is pathognomic of patient with obstructive jaundice. The bile pigments, they are entered the urine, so they cause jaundice, dark urine. The bile salts, uh, they cause frothy urine and they cause itching. So this is all about, if the gallbladder is not palpable, it is unlikely in stone disease. It is palpable in a patient with cancer. So the pain in the right hypochondrial pain, which is relating to the back and the shoulder, these are the common thing. The stone disease is a painful jaundice, and the cancer usually leads to a painless jaundice. So this is the Kohr-Weiser's law. Enlarged palpable gallbladder, which is non-tender, is in a patient with obstructive jaundice, is likely due to the cancer head of the pancreas. This is the Kohr-Weiser's law. If the CBD is obstructed due to calculus, the gallbladder is usually not distended owing to previous inflammatory fibrosis. In obstructed of the obstruction CBD due to the growth of gallbladder, the gallbladder becomes distended. This is Charcot striate. fever, pain, and jaundice. It is due to acute ascending cholangitis. So now comes to the basic laboratory investigations of a patient with jaundice. Liver function test. It is very important. You have to see the pattern of jaundice, whether the liver enzymes are raised or whether the canalicular enzymes, SGPT and SGOT are the liver enzymes, hepatocellular enzymes, and SG gamma GT and alkaline phosphatase are the canalicular enzymes, biliary enzymes. So if gamma GT and alkaline phosphatase is raised, vitamin K deficiency leads to altered PTINR. We can have got renal functions, dysfunctions, complete blood picture we can see for the infection, and C19.9 level as a tumor marker. So this is the interpretation of the liver function test. We have got increased conjugated bilirubin. The indirect bilirubin is not raised. AST or ALT are raised, but the alkaline phosphatase and gamma GT are markedly raised in a patient with obstructive jaundice. So this is one of the picture of the patient with jaundice. You can see this. The alkaline phosphatase is 1535 and the gamma GT is 527. They are very much raised. And as compared to indirect bilirubin, the direct bilirubin is 5.15. So now comes to the radiological investigations. Routinely, we first do the ultrasound to see the stone or not. If there is no stone, then we have to uh, go for the MRCP. If the stone is not visualized on the ultrasound, then you have to go for the MRCP. If the MRCP shows distal CBD structure, it could be malignant, then you have to go for the CT scan abdomen. And then ERCP has got diagnostic as well as therapeutic purpose. So here you can see this. This is the Meniere's syndrome. The gallstone is compressing the CBD. You can see the dilated CBD with the gallstone. And here in this picture, you can see a CBD stone within the CBD is causing the luminal narrowing. So ultrasound is very sensitive to pick the CBD stones. And in ultrasound, if you do the ultrasound and the bile duct is normal, then you have to investigate for the medical cause. And if you have got evidence of biliary dilatation and you suspect a calculi, you can go for the ERCP or MRCP. And if the ERCP, MRCP is not clearly mentioning what is the cause of jaundice, then you have to go for the CT scan. And if the neoplasm is initially suspected in the ultrasound, then you directly have to go for the CT scan of the patient. So this is the MRCP. You can see this magnetic resonance cholangiopancreatography. It shows the right hepatic duct, the left hepatic duct, the common bile duct, CBD. And now this is the duodenum actually. You can see this is the loop of the duodenum where the whole of the bile juice and the pancreatic duct is entering. So MRCP has got will give us a very clear picture of the biliary uh, ductal system. And you people can see this. This is the MRCP of a patient with Klatskin tumor. The tumor is there, as I mentioned before. So the tumor obstructs the common bile duct, and we have the dilated intrahepatic ducts, and the bile is not entering into the common bile duct. Then the CT scan abdomen is very useful for assessment of malignancy. You can see the intrahepatic dilatation. You can see the level of obstruction, and here in the patient, this patient, you can see the CT scan shows the stone which is impacted at the point of the ampulla. This is another patient which shows a mass in the pancreatic head. The common bile duct you can see is very much dilated in this CT scan, and the pancreatic duct is also dilated in this CT scan. You can see this is the obstruction. So the CT scan is very much important. Here you can also see this is the carcinoma of the pancreas. You can easily see the tumor there. This is the aorta, this is the vena cava, this is the liver, this is the kidneys, and you can see this is the stomach. This is the left lobe of the liver, and you can see this is the carcinoma which is obstructing the common bile duct. So now comes to the ERCP. ERCP also has got a therapeutic role as well as diagnostic role. As you can see in the left, the endoscope enters from the stomach into the ampulla of the Vater. We cannulate the ampulla of the Vater, and then we pass a strand and then guide wire, and then we cannulate and we inject the dye. And when we inject the dye, we can see this is the common bile duct which is slightly dilated. This is the cystic duct. You can see the right hepatic duct and the left hepatic duct. So ERCP is endoscopic retrograde cholangiopancreatography. MRCP is magnetic resonance cholangiopancreatography. The important thing is that both gives a cholangiopancreatography. They will give us a complete description of the bile duct and the biliary anatomy as well as the pancreatic anatomy. So it is cholangiopancreatography. See how the ampulla is cannulated and the dye is injected. This is in a stone. You can see how the agar is passed and the stone is removed. So now comes to the basic management principles of the patient obstructive jaundice. This is the last part of my presentation. This initial management is very much important. I try to keep it very simple for you people. The most important thing is that since whole of the urobilinogen is excreted into the uh, out of the body through urine, so urine is very dark, and this conjugated bilirubin is toxic for the kidneys. Remember this, it leads to acute renal failure. So you have to give a patient uh, carbohydrate rich, glucose rich fluid. आप उसको juices, you can give them juices, and if the patient is not able to take much orally, you can give him glucose drips, so that, because you know that the sugar causes diuresis. So you have to diurese these patients. This is the most important thing in a patient with obstructive jaundice. You have to diurese them, because it wash out the kidneys, and there is a less chances of renal toxicity. So the patient, if the patient is having pain, you can give analgesics, antacids, omeprazole, or proton pump inhibitors. The patient usually having vomiting, so you can give antiemetics. Antibiotic is controversial. If the patient is not infected, WBC count is normal, you don't need to give antibiotics. But if you suspect there are chances of infection and obstructed system can be infected at any time, then you can give antibiotics. Input output charting is very much important, because these patients are prone to develop renal insufficiency, renal failure, acute kidney injury. So you always have to check the urine output, and if the patient is not able to calculate it, or if the patient is not in good state, you can pass the Foley's catheter. And if the patient is, there is a lot of vomiting, because these tumors, pancreatic head tumors, or the distal CBD tumors, or the ampullary tumor, they do not only obstruct the common bile duct and the pancreatic duct, but they can also obstruct the duodenum. So then you can have to pass the NG and the Foley's. So this is the basic management. Whenever the patient comes to you, we give fluids, analgesics, and antibiotics, and we have to pass NG and Foley's. Not in all cases, in some cases. Otherwise, we have to monitor and strict input and output charting. So this is the basic management algorithm as we have discussed. If a patient of jaundice comes to you, do the liver function test, basic investigations, and differentiate it with hemolytic jaundice, hepatocellular jaundice, and obstructive jaundice. If it turned out to be an obstructive jaundice, the most important investigation is ultrasound abdomen. And if the ultrasound abdomen shows a stone disease, directly you can go for the ERCP. If there is a biliary dilatation but no stone is found, you can have an option of ERCP, MRCP, and CT scan. And if you cannot find any cause, directly go to the CT scan. So it comes to the definitive care. If there are the gallstones, we do the ERCP, remove the stones, and then we stunt it, or plus minus stunting, and then later cholecystectomy. If it is a benign stricture due to the previous stone pathology, it causes inflammation and stricture, we dilate it. And if it is not, if we are not able to dilate it, then we can go hepaticojejunostomy. I will discuss basically few important points of these surgeries in my presentation as well. Then the tumors, the periampullary tumors, the tumors around the ampulla, we have go for the Whipple's procedure and the triple bypass. If the tumor is not resectable, we just bypass it. We call it triple bypass. Otherwise, we do the Whipple's procedure. If it is a Klatskin tumor, it is involving the right hepatic duct and left hepatic duct. Depending upon this, we go for the either right hepatectomy and the left hepatectomy. And if it is a gallbladder cancer, we can go for the extended cholecystectomy plus minus CBD excision if needed. So this is the picture you can see. This is a patient with choledocholitis. There is stones in the uh, common bile duct. So we just do the ERCP, we remove the stones, and if needed, we can go for the stenting. But always remember, if the stone comes from the gallbladder and you did the ERCP, remove the stones, then you refer the patient to the surgeon, so that these patient needs early cholecystectomy, so that the gallbladder is removed and the stones are removed. So this is very important. You can see this is stone, and first of all we enter the duodenum, then we cannulate the ampulla of Vater, then we pass the guide wire, and then we pass a balloon which goes, and then we take a balloon sweep so that we can remove the stone. So this is how you can remove the stone. Here you can see this in the ERCP. You pass the guide wire, and you can see now the balloon is passed beyond the stone, and this balloon is inflated. So once you inflate the balloon beyond the stone, proximal to the stone, and you push the balloon inside the duodenum, the stone comes along with the balloon. We call it balloon sweeps. So we do multiple balloon sweeps to remove the stone. Now this is a benign stricture. This diagram is very important for you people. It's a very basic diagram. You people can understand this. If it is a biliary stricture which is not dilated, first of all, in benign strictures we go for the ERCP and we try to dilate. We pass the balloon in the, as you can see in my previous present picture. Okay, if you can see the structure is there, you can pass the balloon over the structure and you dilate the balloon as much as you can. So we call it dilatation of the structure. But if it is not able to dilate it, then you have to go for the hepaticojejunostomy. And since you people know that the bile has come to the is coming through the common bile duct into the duodenum, and then from the duodenum it is coming into the jejunum. We take a loop of the ileum or jejunum, and we take this loop into the Roux loop. We call it Roux loop, and this loop is attached to the common bile duct. We call it hepaticojejunostomy. So it collects the bile, this loop, and then this loop is reconnected. Actually, this part is there. This is the duodenum, and this is the start of the jejunum. So we cut the jejunum from here. You can see this. We cut the jejunum from here. We take the distal part upwards, and we connect the distal part, take it proximally, connect, cut the CBD, cut the structure part, and then we make an anastomosis. We call it hepaticojejunostomy. Since the jejunum is open from there, because we take this part there, so we again anastomose it. So the stomach and the pancreatic secretions are entering into the jejunum, as well as the bile is also entering into the jejunum. So we call it Roux-en-Y hepaticojejunostomy. So I think people can understand. It is a very simple diagram. In a patient with gallbladder cancer, let's suppose you can see this is the gallbladder. This is the gallbladder bed. This is the gallbladder bed. This liver, this is the gallbladder bed. So we have to take the gallbladder bed out, as well as some basic lymph nodes. We call it extended cholecystectomy. And if the tumor is compressing the common bile duct, here in you can see this, if the tumor is also compressing the common bile duct, then you have to take the bile duct along with the gallbladder and the part of the liver, and then we can have a Roux-en-Y hepaticojejunostomy, so that the bile is entering into the small bowel. So this is a more complete picture. You can see this. This is the dotted area. This is the dotted area which we use in the extended cholecystectomy. We take the gallbladder and we take the retroduodenal, the cystic duct, cystic lymph node, the lymph nodes around the common hepatic artery. And if necessary, we can cut the CBD if it is compressed by the tumor, and then we later on make a hepaticojejunostomy. So now this term is very important for the third year students. Always remember what is the periampullary area. It is an area which is 2 centimeter of the ampulla of Vater. You can see this is the duodenum. Here this is the duodenum, and here is the ampulla of the Vater. I have discussed in my previous presentation. So any 2 centimeter area around the ampulla of Vater is called periampullary area, and any tumor within this area is known as periampullary tumors. So people can see this in this diagram. This is the duodenum and this is the ampulla. So any area of 2 centimeter around the ampulla is known as periampullary area. And as you can see in this picture, you can see a distal CBD tumor. In this area, you can see a pancreatic head tumor, because pancreatic head is also in periampullary region. You can see ampulla. So ampulla, the primary tumor of the ampulla, as well as the duodenal tumor. So distal CBD tumor head of the pancreas, ampullary tumor, and the duodenal tumor. Distal CBD tumor accounts for 10% of the periampullary tumors. Head of the pancreas account for more than 80% of the periampullary tumors. Ampulla also accounts around 10%, and duodenum is very less than 1% common. So This is the last picture of my presentation, but this picture is very important, and I want the 30 people understand what is the Vipas procedure which we commonly perform at our unit. In liver transplant unit, we are usually performing Vipas procedures every week and every uh, in a increased amount of frequency. This procedure should be performed in very specialized unit. It is not like a surgery that a surgeon can perform once or twice. It should be done performed in an increased frequency so that the complications are decreased. So you can people can see this is a tumor of the head of the pancreas or periampullary tumor. So you have to remove the 5 centimeter area around the tumor. So the common hepatic duct is cut there, the gallbladder and the common hepatic duct is cut from there. This is section number one. Then we resect the stomach at the pylorus, sometime at the pylorus, sometime at the distal part of the stomach. This is section number two. Then we cut the head of the pancreas at the neck. This is the neck of the pancreas. This is the head, and this is the body. We cut the pancreas, section number three, and then we cut the jejunum. So this whole area is taken out. You can see this whole of the specimen. The whole of the duodenum is taken out. The pancreatic head is taken out. The gallbladder, along with the common hepatic duct, is taken out. So we have got three open areas. The anastomosis, the first anastomosis which we do, we take the jejunum. Here we cut the jejunum. You can see the jejunum is cut there. So we take this loop of the jejunum. This is the loop. Just see this picture. This loop of the jejunum, we take this loop and we anastomose this loop to the pancreas. So this is the first anastomosis. Then we anastomose to the bile duct, the hepatic duct. This is the second anastomosis. And then you can see this loop of the jejunum is attached to the stomach. So as you see in this picture, the food from the stomach has to reach the jejunum. The pancreatic juice has to reach the jejunum, and the bile has to enter the duodenum and jejunum. So the faith is all of these three fruits and food has to reach the jejunum. So again, we make three anastomosis with the stomach gastrojejunostomy, pancreatojejunostomy, and hepaticojejunostomy, so that now the pancreatic juice, biliary juice, and the stomach contents enter the jejunum. So you can see in this picture, the gray area is the area which is resected. There is a tumor at the head of the pancreas, and you can see that it is compressing the common bile duct and the pancreatic duct. So we resect the bile duct, we resect the pancreas, and we resect the small intestine there. This loop of the small intestine, the jejunum, is now taken up, and this is the first anastomosis with the pancreas, anastomosis number one. Anastomosis number two, we have the bile duct anastomosis with the jejunum, and then we have got a gastrojejunostomy. This is the third anastomosis. This is again a picture. You can see the disease in the head of the pancreas. You can see this is the disease in the head of the pancreas. This is the specimen which is removed, which contains the duodenum and part of the jejunum. This is the whole of the head of the pancreas is removed. The gallbladder along with the common hepatic duct is removed. Now this is the common hepatic duct. You can see this is open. The jejunum, the pancreas is half cut. The distal pancreas is open, and the stomach end is open. And now we have got three anastomosis. The first anastomosis is the pancreatic anastomosis. This is the hepaticojejunostomy, and this is the gastrojejunostomy. So just see this picture. If the tumor is not resectable, it is attached to the superior mesenteric vein. This is superior mesenteric artery, or it is attached to the portal vein on the common hepatic artery or the vena cava. If we are not able to resect the tumor, then we just take this loop and make a triple bypass. We do hepaticojejunostomy, pancreatojejunostomy, and we cut the CBD from there and make an anastomosis. So we call it triple bypass. When the tumor is resected, this is a Whipple's procedure. If the tumor is not resected, we take jejunum and make anastomosis, because this tumor is obstructing the pancreatic juice, is obstructing the bile, and as well as it is compressing the duodenum, and it causes gastric obstruction. So you have to go for the bypass in this patient. So I'm just completing. This is the question answer session. You can raise questions and you can ask questions, please. I cannot see the questions actually. So if you people are asking any question, you can ask actually. I try to make it more concise and simple so that you people can understand. Um, okay, so there are a few questions. One question is from Abdul Rafi that fatty stools are in obstructive jaundice only or in all three, usually in obstructive jaundice, because in obstructive jaundice the fat soluble vitamins cannot enter the duodenum, so that we have got obstructive jaundice majority in patients with fatty stools in obstructive jaundice, as well as in pancreatitis, because in pancreatitis you know that the amylase and lipase and the pancreatic juice is also not end forming actually. So there is a pancreatic insufficiency. So in obstructive jaundice, if it is a pancreatic obstruction as well, we have got pale stools, bulky stools. Okay, so the basic reason why we have got pale stools in bulky stools in obstructive jaundice, fatty stools, because there is a pancreatic insufficiency as well. And when there is a pancreatic insufficiency, the fat is not dissolved and is not absorbed in the body. You people can understand that the bile and the pancreatic juice is necessary, especially specifically for the absorption of the fats. So when the bile is not entering the stomach and the duodenum actually, the fat is not absorbed and we have got a bulky stools. Okay. So in the Whipple's procedures, sometimes we preserve the stomach. Sometimes you can go to the preserve the stomach. You preserve the pylorus. We call it pylorus preserving uh, uh, Whipple's procedure or pancreatoduodenectomy, and we preserve the pylorus. But in majority of the cases, what we have practiced in our center is that we resect the distal third of the gastric antrum as well, and then we make a gastrojejunostomy. Sometimes we go for the uh, pancreatic sparing, and sometimes pylorus sparing, and sometimes without pylorus sparing. So now one question is that how is triple bypass different from the Whipple's procedure? As I have mentioned, if the tumor is not resectable, and when we go inside and we cannot be able to resect the tumor, actually in the pictures you can see this, then the tumor is still there. We are not removing the tumor, but we take the loop of the jejunum, we connect the loop of the jejunum from the upper part of the outer part, anterior part of the stomach, so that the food is entering the jejunum. Then we take this loop, we again connect this loop to the common hepatic duct. We again make anastomosis there. We cannot resect the common hepatic duct. We just make a small incision in the common hepatic duct and we make a hole in it and we just make an anastomosis. And then the uh, pancreatic duct, we open the pancreatic duct and then we anastomosis there. So the tumor is still there. We have not removed the tumor. We just make a bypass. We call it triple bypass. So any questions, please? Any more questions? So the core Voiser's law, I just repeat it. If the gallbladder is distended, if patient comes to you with obstructive jaundice and you can examine the patient, the gallbladder is palpable, it means the gallbladder is not diseased. So unlikely it's a stone disease. It is due to the tumor, because you can understand if the tumor is there in the pylori ampullary region and it obstruct the bile, so the whole of the bile is now going into and absorbed, collected in the gallbladder. The gallbladder is very much distended. But if it is a stone disease, so stone comes from the gallbladder. So first of all, before entering the CBD, that stone causes obstruction in the gallbladder. It causes acute cholecystitis. It causes biliary colics. It causes chronic cholecystitis. So due to these multiple episodes of cholecystitis, the gallbladder is shrunken. And when this stone comes down in the ampulla and obstruct the ampulla, now the bile is flow is increased. There is cholestasis. The gallbladder cannot be distended because it is already inflamed and shrunken actually. So the core Voiser's law said that if the patient with obstructive jaundice comes to you and the gallbladder is distended and palpable, it is likely due to the malignant disease or a tumor. unlikely to a stone disease. This is the Courvoisier's law. So this law, I think, should understand this. So any more question? So I think at the end of the presentation, you people, just like the learning outcome, you should, what I think that the take home message is that you should be able to understand what is jaundice, what are different types of jaundice, how can you interpret this, you should understand. And then if it is an obstructive jaundice, the basic rule is do the LFTs, confirm it's an obstructive jaundice, and go for the ultrasound. And if the ultrasound tells you it is a stone disease, you can directly go for the ERCP. But if the ultrasound shows that there is the dilatation of the common bile duct, there is some obstruction, but you cannot clearly see that it is stone or something else, go for the MRCP on or ERCP. But if the MRCP is still suspect some tumor, to stage the tumor, you have to go for the CT scan so that you can see the resectability of the disease, you can see the metastasis. And if the tumor is resectable, the option for the periampullary tumors is the Whipple's procedure. So for the stone, ERCP in stenting is in majority of the cases is very successful, but for the tumor, the Whipple's procedure, the main procedure. If it is the benign strictures, then we dilate it. But in most of the cases, these are the ischemic strictures. Mostly post cholecystectomy trauma to the CVD leads to stricture formation. So in these patients, we go at our center, we go for the hepaticojejunostomy. So I think I am completing. The time is over, and uh, and